coven. If you find you want more missing witches and this strange magic in your life, come grab a t-shirt at TeePublic or one of the sweet black hoodies that I wear all the time, or get our book. We poured our heart and brains and minds and all the magic we could find into it. We'd love to know what you think. We'd love to read your reviews on Amazon or Goodreads. And of course, the old rate, review, and subscribe means a lot. And support our sponsor at Foxglove Farm using offer code Missing Witches. Thanks. Love you. Bye.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Coven, welcome back to the Witches Found branch of the Missing Witches podcast experience. We're so happy you're here, and I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Julia Skinner today. We love calling Dr. Witches Dr. Witch. Dr. Skinner and I met over the internet over a mutual excitement about women and beer and the history of witchcraft. So maybe with that in your minds as a starting point, allow me to welcome into our circle Julia. And I wonder if you would sort of give us a bit of an intro to your work with Root Kitchens and as a food historian, and maybe we can go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. And thank you so much for having me on. I am the founder of Root Kitchens, which is a fermentation and food history organization here in Atlanta. And so it has a few different things that I do there. One of them is education, so online classes as well as in-person classes in the non-COVID times. And then I do a lot of consulting for creative folks. So like I've helped filmmakers and authors and stuff, like if they're trying to tell a story, of course, in their work, and, helping people think through how they can use food to strengthen those narratives. And then I also do like a membership newsletter and program, and that's a lot of fun. I write articles for it and develop recipes for it, and so it's a lot of playing in the kitchen.
Playing in the kitchen is one of our favorite family activities. Can you talk about where you sit at the intersection of science and witchcraft?
Yeah. So in my work, I deal a lot with things that can feel very heady and scientific, and often, sometimes feel over my head. Microbiology is not what my PhD is in. But, I think something my mom told me when I was younger really comes to mind every time I think about how those two things intersect for me. So my mom used to tell me, she was very Christian, but also, unlike many of her peers, would take me to natural history museums and all of these things. And I remember asking her about the tension between her faith and her love of science. And she was like, well, I don't see a tension between them. My science reconfirms my faith. Science tells me, we've learned all these things, and isn't it amazing that this has, been built, and that this is, that we have this wonderful world to be in. And so that's really informed how I think about witchcraft and science in my own practice, is that, science adds to that sense of wonder. It doesn't detract from it. And so the more I learn about all of the amazing things that, fermentation microbes do, and all of that, the more I'm just in awe of them. There's such a big part of my own personal craft that's just being in awe of all of these things around us.
Yeah, experiencing life from a perspective of awe in the natural world, I think, is really my anchor for what I think of as a witch philosophy or a craft, for sure. Mm-hmm. I want to come back to that because I have a question for you about fermentation and leavening, but because I've sort of teased this idea about beer, and I guess fermentation is connected, and right now I'm sitting in a room with two big containers of beer fermenting, so my office just reeks delightfully. Can you tell us a bit about beer history and women's history and witch history? Give us a little bit of that story.
Yeah, so it's something like I started looking at a couple years ago, and then also explore in my next book too. It's interesting because it's one of those many cases of women both being vilified for witchcraft and being erased from what were once women-dominated spaces. And so brewing for thousands of years has been quote unquote women's work. It was something that was done, in the household, kind of like a daily driver sort of kitchen chore. You could also buy beer, of course, from neighbors, vendors, whatever, but like this was primarily women. One source I looked at said that it was the most dominant profession of women in medieval court records, which is one of the few ways that we have documentation of women from that time, because of course, like, we weren't important enough to write about otherwise. So it's kind of an interesting, like, it was so prevalent and it was so much connected with the identity of, being a woman, being a housewife in, particularly in Northern Europe, England, stuff like that. Not so much in Southern Europe, as far as I can tell, because that was more of a wine drinking area. But even back in ancient Egypt, women, wine was considered this thing that the men made and was very expertise driven. And then, they're like, oh yeah, and beer, just like, I don't know, women make that, whatever. And then, eventually had this shift towards it being more professionalized, is the kind of weird term that we often use. And we see that again in England. And so in England, like I said, these court records showed us that women were really, really the ones brewing. This was very much women, quote unquote, women's work. And then at some point, men decided that they wanted to do brewing, and they wanted to make it something that they could control. And so, as often happens, women were then, rather than being able to continue to exist in their spaces of expertise, were pushed out, and their histories largely erased, and their professional work actually vilified. And so witchcraft, perceptions of witchcraft at least, became a very central part of the narratives around getting women out of those spaces. And so, how our modern kind of image of a witch, like here in the US, is pointy hat, bubbling cauldron, cats, broom, all of this stuff. All of that originates from, the alewives, women who sold ale on street corners in England. And so these women were, they were just making it and selling it. And, the men were like, no, we want this to be, big business. We want to professionalize, quote unquote, professionalize this by putting guilds around it and all of these other structures that inherently exclude women. And so they did. And as they did that, they used all of this imagery from the alewives' professional work to vilify them. So the pointy hats that we associate with witches now, those were kind of like their costume thing. Like, they're on the street and it's like, they're like, notice me, I'm over here, I'm the beer person, here's my hat. And the cats, they would keep cats because they had stores of grain that mice would get in. So, having cats to catch the mice was helpful. They had a broom to sweep up fallen grain off of the floor. And of course, the bubbling cauldron itself is a cauldron full of beer. And so we have this, these women who had been doing this forever, who then, when the men wanted them out, just kind of did this thing we see over and over and over again, of women being framed as witches in order to scare them out of a space or to scare people away from them for various, reasons. And if I can go off on a little bit of a tangent, I've been thinking a lot about it.
Please.
Yay.
Always.
I've been thinking a lot about that history and about the Celtic goddess Caradwen also, because I feel like we see a similar erasure within her story. You know, Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks a lot about how the stories that we have now are often the bones of what were older, more women-centered stories. And these were often subverted and made into more patriarchal stories. And so we have people like Caradwen, gods like Caradwen, who are vilified as being these, you know, really spiteful goddesses and whatever, but they very much may not have been in the original story. So Caradwen in Celtic mythology was the goddess who cared for the cauldron of like knowledge and inspiration. So, you know, kind of if you're familiar with like the Viking mead of inspiration, she kind of had a similar thing. But they think that it was barley beer instead. And so she has this cauldron with this like special brew in it. And just like with the women who were vilified by the male brewing guilds, her story has taken on this light of, you know, this kid that she like entrusted to stir this cauldron for her, you know, steals some of the brew of knowledge and inspiration out of this cauldron. And then she goes after him because she's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, and so, you know, but we've now in this story, you know, they've added there's all this stuff about like she gave birth to this baby and it was hideous. And then like this, you know, triumphant kid that ended up like actually stealing stuff from her is the good character in this story now. It's like she was guarding this very special gift to share. And then a male character takes away her agency to share that gift in the way she wants, and then she's vilified for it. And I think that's because of that particular framing, it leads me to believe that, you know, her and her beer are framed, you know, through a patriarchal lens in a way that the original myth was not meant to be.
Yeah, we do see that so often. And I have those moments anyway, where I'm reading history or mythology, and I'm like, this just feels flipped. The woman became this violent, raging beast, and it sure seems like the reason for that has gone missing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually writing about the Haitian Revolution now, about the women and priestesses of the Haitian Revolution. And I hit on this quote. It's in Jane Boisvert's essay, Colonial Hell and Female Slave Resistance in Saint-Domingue. And it just has been echoing ever since, and I've been thinking about you. So the quote is something like that Vodou was the leavening agent for the people's liberation from chains. So yeah, obviously I think about leavening and fermenting, and like how we had these relationships to change that maybe we understood differently when we had a closer relationship to food. I wondered if you would just like think out loud for us about leavening and fermenting and how those processes work, maybe in food and maybe in us as well.
Yeah. So it's, you know, it's interesting because we do see a lot of, you know, like you said, these mentions of fermentation kind of as an explicitly magical, you know, like represented as a magical thing, you know, or as transformation. And so indeed, like Sandra Katz talks about fermentation as the transformative action of microbes. And so there's inherent transformation, change, a lack of stillness within these sorts of spaces. And I think that, you know, that's so important to our understanding of these as magical things, as, you know, as leavening. I mean, literally to rise. You know, but with that, it's like to rise, but there's an understanding that like there's kind of a structure within that. Like if you look at leavening dough, it's not, you know, there's actually kind of a structure of bubbles, of course, holding that up. It's got kind of this interconnected structure along with the bubbles of carbon dioxide. And so it's, I've been thinking a lot about magic and fermentation and change and all of these, you know, transformation and all of this, in part, I'm making a oracle deck right now that is fermentation based, and So it's oracle cards that deal with different ferments, and then it talks about how we can use these as interpretive lenses for thinking about ourselves and our magical lives. And so, for example, Shio Koji, which is like this salt koji water blend, it's, it has a very simple flavor, but it makes the flavors of everything else shine. You can use it, as a marinade, you can use it in soups, you can use it all over the place. And so, but thinking about it through that personal interpretive lens, it's like, what can I do to kind of perform that, in the lives of others? How can I help those around me, shine in that way? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I've been really wanting to write at some point about, more deeply about fermentation, mythology, and folklore, and all of this stuff. But I'm right now doing the oracle deck and kind of, trying to explore that space of magic and play along with like my work and with my creative self. And so I'm kind of sitting more with that right now, but I do at some point want to do more of kind of a academic-ish dive into a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, about how fermentation is represented.
Right. Yeah. Because there's two sides to that, like, or many infinite sides, but two that jump to mind, that like there's how writers and thinkers have used metaphors of fermentation to describe what they're understanding about how their own spirit changes through either ritual or magic, or through, spiritual death, or through those processes. Like that language of fermentation gets used a lot. And then sort of like how, like metaphysical writers or spiritual writers like to use, quantum physics as a metaphor a lot, like, and sometimes inappropriately, probably. Yeah. We're probably doing the same thing with fermentation. But then on the flip side, there's like, your understanding and sort of the understanding of microbiologists and people like White Feather Hunter we've had on the podcast before, who are looking at the actual process that happens to the yeast, for example, or to the cell, and really, how do we understand the life of that life, and what does that teach us about life?
Yeah, and there's like so many directions it can go in, because of course, unlike us, bacteria and some other microbes are able to, adapt genetically adapt quickly to new environments. They're informed by the beings around them. We're all inherently interconnected, and we too are informed by these beings. We have multiple pounds of, microbes living within our bodies that, help us with digestion, mood, and like a million other things. Like we have these like friends that are always with us and around us. Like every surface has, lactobacillus, for example, fermentation microbes that are used in making sauerkraut, just are kind of all around, wild yeasts, all these other things that are assistive to us that we've partnered with for thousands of years. And, like kind of how we talked about when we first started talking, that sense of wonder and like the science kind of becoming an informative lens through which you practice, the sense of wonder that's so central to a lot of our magic. As you said, like being in awe of the natural world. Like I get so excited about the microbes. Like I'm working on a class right now on using fermentation for meditation and building a fermentation practice as a meditative practice, because that's Chef Jenny Dorsey, who I really, really love, at one point was talking about how meditation for many people through history, think about, for example, the women brewing those beers, for example, they are doing, the lion's share of domestic work, childcare, if not all of it. When are you going to have time to sit and meditate and sit still? Like she mentioned kind of an inherent privilege in the ability to quietly sit and meditate that many people for any number of reasons, have not had that ability or had access to that. And so I was thinking a lot about that, and I was thinking about how then I have often trouble sitting and meditating. I don't have time to or whatever. And I was like, well, in what ways do I build this into my life? Because many people would have, and like in the kitchen is kind of a main way that, people have done that. And I was like, oh yeah, my fermentation, I've got like this big baker's rack that's full of hundreds of fermenting things at any point. And it's kind of getting out of hand, but I love it. And I start my mornings going and saying good morning to all of these partner microbes that I'm working with, my friends, my helpers, my collaborators. And I go and stir things and check things and smell things and taste things, and kind of like that has become a meditative practice for me. And so, I was thinking a lot about that and talking with some friends, and they were like, you should teach a class on this. So many people could benefit from that. I was just like, that was also kind of a tangent. I'm kind of going on a lot of tangents today.
Oh my gosh, my brain is just lit up. I mean, for one, my partner and I think a lot about because he's an artisan, he's a leather worker, and he sort of has said before that his mind is kind of only in a meditative state when he's working, when he's working with his hands, and he's figuring out how things fold and bend and move in space, and going from the sewing machine to the hand sewing, and I'm so intrigued by this idea that for all of us, our natural experience or relationship to meditation was, or to, that kind of brain space that where we can be more connected to the planet and the universe, was tied to our labor in our hands, was tied to our craft, was tied to cooking and the time we spent. And then when you add that level of, the fermentation that the natural world and the sort of invisible livingness of it was all talking back to us while we were working in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And that we were kind of broken from that by industrialization, and that this sort of mix of capitalism, patriarchy, racism, what we might call kyriarchy, that broke all of us. That broke all of us, not just women.
Yeah. My friend, Narinder Bazin, who's one of my friends here in Atlanta, I remember her telling me something that's really stuck with me in the last year, which is that play is sacred. This playing in the kitchen, as you just talked about, this working with your hands, is this is a sacred act to create space for play and for just undirected, whatever, frolicking, creating, kind of whatever just gives you that sort of free space. And so as you were saying that, I was that phrase kept rolling around in my mind too.
Yes. We talk about play a little bit in our book, which is arriving at people's doors now, Missing Witches. So that's my little plug. Julia, do you want to tell us a little bit about your existing books and your forthcoming book and how else people can find you and get connected? I think by the time this episode has come out, we will already have launched the giveaway that we're doing for Julia's incredible online class. Is it called Preserving Abundance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, you talk about it. I want to talk excitedly about it because I know way less than you. So you talk about it.
Okay. So that class is all about. It's very fermentation heavy, but it's not exclusively fermentation. It also has home crafts and other non-fermented foods you can make, and then of course a lot of fermented food too. But it's very much focused on reducing food waste, and so using up your food scraps, the different ways you can do that, which is a lot of fun. And that class I really I find very rewarding because it's helpful for getting people kind of in this different headspace of thinking about their food. But like all of my classes, it has a historical emphasis as well. So it has I talk a lot about, turning to the ways that people have made their food in the past. I mean, of course, people were not always able to, like, they didn't have the kind of abundance that we have now. They couldn't just walk into a grocery store and be like, oh, look, it's, whatever, way out of season for strawberries, yet here they are. People had to make do with what they had, and they had to save it and, preserve it. And so thinking through things with that lens, I think, has been really helpful for people. It gives them a framework for reducing food waste. And I build in that sort of historical framework around all of my classes. Those are all available at rootkitchens.shop. And then from there, people can navigate around the whole rest of my website that has all the other, consulting and the membership and all the other stuff on it. I also have recently launched a class with my partner, who is he's a Senegalese artist. He's been making art for many years. His name is Abdallah. We have launched a class teaching mudcloth dye, which is also fermented. And so that's over at fermentationschool.com. And there at Fermentation School, that's kind of a collective of fermentation teachers, and there's a bunch of other cool stuff there. So there's our class, and then we, let's see, what else? My books. So I have a couple other books out right now, one on afternoon tea, and then one I published years and years ago that was on this one 1615 cookbook. And that one is called Modernizing Markham. The afternoon tea one is called Afternoon Tea, a History, pretty easy to remember. And the next one is coming out in 2022. So it's coming out through Story Publishing, and it's called Culture Begins Here, Fermentation and the History of How We Eat. So if people follow me on social media, they can, sign up for newsletters, whatever they want. They have a lot of ways to get in touch with me. So at Root Kitchens and at Bookish Julia are the two handles I use on Instagram and Twitter for folks to follow if they want and get updates about, that book, the Oracle deck, all the other, my crazy fermentation experiments, my cats.
Just all the important stuff. I wonder if you would leave us with maybe a simple ritual you do. Maybe it's fermentation or meditation related, or maybe it's just like a little starting point, or just something that is working for you right now that listeners can carry into their practice and feel sort of a connection to you and to the coven when they do it. Does anything like that come to mind that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the thing that's so special to me about fermented food is that it's both, ubiquitous. It's, we have so much of it around us, but it's also so simple. So, I really like to get people to think about doing wild fermentation, using that to connect to the place around them. And it doesn't have to be complex. It can be like, I grew these carrots in my garden and now I'm gonna, put them in brine and ferment them and kind of see, what happens with that. But not just making it being like, great, I've got pickled carrots now, but like really connecting to recognizing that these are of this place. Like, even if you buy the carrots, the microbes in your home are different than the microbes in my home. So it becomes your very own ritual that speaks to place. And then when you share that with other people, you are literally sharing a part of yourself and your home with them. So that's kind of a good starting point, I think, for people to just start to get this sense of wonder and exploration about a place. I can think of like 1,000 others too, but I think that's a good kind of, just get something and just, start, like, make a brine. Literally all you need is, natural salt that doesn't have additives, caking agents and stuff in it, and water and whatever fruit or vegetable. And you just, experiment with it. You just do that, that play, that sacred play, but with food. And then, then you're starting to collaborate with these beings that have been there waiting to support you and are supporting you all the time.
You must be a witch.
Hey friends, if after listening you find you want a little coven loving in your life, check out our sponsor, Foxglove Farm. Use offer code Missing Witches to get some of that handmade, ethical, awesome witchy goodness in your life. We always love hearing from you, so send us your reviews on whatever podcast service you use. And if you want to read the book, gosh, we'd love to send it to you. So find it, tell us what you think, and share your thoughts on Amazon or Goodreads. And yeah, see you out there. We love you. Be safe. Blessed if I can be.